Aw, Puff the Magic Dragon, what a childhood classic. Over a decade later, I, the very mature and very adult 18-year-old that I am, still ironically listens to it occasionally. Puff and I have a long history. As a fantasy enthusiast and a dragon lover, Puff the Magic Dragon was always my favorite song. I remember when I was little, when CDs and radios were still in style, my grandmother would put in the disc of nursery rhymes while we played. Most of the songs are mediocre. To be honest, I don't remember a single one except Puff, the very last song on the CD. Because of radios at the time, we couldn't simply skip to Puff the Magic Dragon and listen to it on repeat for hours, so instead we listened to the entire CD over and over again just to listen to Puff the Magic Dragon. Spotify really is the best thing since sliced bread. But reminiscing aside, let's talk Puff. The song was popularized by the folk band Peter, Paul and Mary in 1962, however, it wasn't recorded until the following year. Peter Yarrow wrote the song, but not the lyrics, and it's just one of the many pieces they performed. Along with their children's repertoire, they also produced protest songs and were involved in both the civil rights movement and the Vietnam War. They have also amassed a few awards, one of which was a Grammy for their children's album, Peter, Paul and Mommy, in 1969, which is one of the weirdest album names I've ever heard. One of the 12 songs on this album was, you guessed it, Puff the Magic Dragon. So they were fairly popular during their time and played a key role in popularizing folk music. Today, Puff the Magic Dragon is their only song that's still relevant, which is impressive since it was written 40 years ago. But perhaps its popularity has to do with the controversy surrounding it. It feels like anything alive today only remains relevant because of drama. Now, as said earlier, Yarrow wrote the music for the song but not the lyrics. He based the song off a poem about a dragon written by Leonard Lipton, and he even gave him credit as a songwriter alongside himself. Lipton wrote the poem when he was just 19 years old and studying at Cornell University, and funnily enough, he was inspired by another poem about a dragon that was written by Ogden Nash. Sadly, the poem Lipton wrote has been lost to time, but since Yarrow credited him as a songwriter, it can be safe to assume there isn't much variation between the original poem and the song, although there was one stanza of Lipton's poem that was not included in Yarrow's song adaptation. Allegedly, the stanza included a second child coming to Puff after Jackie Paper leaves him. Remember this for later, it's important. So now that we know all that, let's talk about the real meat of the story. Over the years, many people have theorized and developed their own interpretations of Puff. Some are very harmless, noting its many similarities to Peter Pan. However, others are much darker. There are many people who believe Puff the Magic Dragon is about drugs, specifically marijuana. In 1964, an article published in Newsweek's magazine presented a theory that many songs in pop culture had underlying drug-supportive messages. Puff was one of them. As a side note, this feels strangely familiar. It's almost like this exact same thing happens with every piece of popular music, so online creators and news sources can get likes and clicks. But either way, there are a handful of lyrics that lead people to believe this theory is true. The first 4 lines of the song are proof enough for some, so let's take a look.
Puff the magic dragon lived by the sea and frolicked in the autumn mist in a land called Honolulu.
There's actually quite a bit going on here when the lyrics are looked at through the lens of the drug theorists. But the main 3 pieces of evidence cited are the following 3 correlations. Puff is meant to represent taking a puff of smoke from a joint, paper from Jackie Paper is the joint roll itself, and dragon is a variation of the word dragon, as in the drag one feels after indulging in marijuana. There is more too, such as the mist of Honolulu being the smoke from the joint itself, as well as by the sea really meaning by the sea, as in the letter C, with the C standing for cannabis, but I think these are weaker than the first 3 pieces of evidence. But as you may have guessed, all parties involved in the making and performing of this song deny any claims that it is in any way related to marijuana. I mean, if you're singing for children, why would you admit that, yes, this song is about drugs, this very song I perform for toddlers? That sounds like a PR nightmare. Instead, Lipton claims his writing is about innocence. He writes, I think Puff the Magic Dragon is about a boy and his dragon, while Yarrow claims, I can assure you it's a song about innocence lost. As for the rumored drug messages, he puts them to rest in the same statement, saying, this is a rumor that was promulgated by the Newsweek magazine, there is no basis for it. Whether or not you believe these rumors is up to your own interpretation. I will admit it's fun to believe in things like this sometimes. Art would be boring if we couldn't interpret it, even if our interpretations are baseless and wrong. So, even if this has ruined the song for you, or if you've been a Puff hater this entire time, in which case why are you even here, You can't deny the impact Puff the Magic Dragon has had on modern culture. Puff has been turned into plush dragons, one of which I still proudly own, and the song lyrics were adapted into a book in 1994 and illustrated by Eric Pubarrett. And if you're wondering, yes, I own this too. My copy is very dusty and the jacket is a little worse for wear, but the pictures are amazing and I love it. But fun fact, remember earlier when we discussed that one stanza of the poem that was left out of the song? Well, I don't think it's a coincidence that on the last page of the book, there's a little girl who comes to find Puff in his beach cave after Jackie has grown up and left him. However, toys and books weren't enough for Puff. Oh no. He landed himself 3 short animated movies, one in 1978, another in 1979, and the last in 1982. They are by far the weirdest things I've ever watched. If the song isn't based on drugs, then this definitely is. The animation itself is fine, but the story and the character designs are slightly unnerving and just odd. The movies are only loosely based on the song itself, though, and I distinctly remember at 9 years old being disappointed that Puff and Jackie were not sailing around the seas and having tea with kings and princes the entire time. No, instead, Honolulu was a horrible nightmare wasteland teeming with naked mole rat-looking creatures who sneezed all the time and had giant red noses because they never knew the joys of Kleenex. And that's just one of the movies, but I digress. Once you've been featured in a movie, even if the movie is bad, I think that makes you famous. So congrats, Puff, you're an old man by today's standards, but at least you're famous. There's no denying the impact this one children's song has had on the folk song industry as a whole, as well as music in general. It's a kid's classic, even if it is about drugs. But clearly the reputation isn't stopping the merch, nor the 13 million listeners on YouTube, from jamming to it often, nor is it erasing its history. At its best, Puff the Magic Dragon is about losing childhood innocence and growing up, and at its worst, Puff the Magic Dragon may be about smoking a whole lot of funky lettuce. Either way, I'm going to go unironically listen to Puff, and I hope that you will too. Thanks for listening.
Lived by the sea and frolicked in the autumn mist in a land